so we'll have a copy of that. Okay, so as I was saying, each session will be recorded and they'll be uploaded after the event. So let's see if I can change slides. There we go. So today we're going to start off with the AGM, and which will be fairly short, and then an update from Anoushka on the Oceania RDA Committee and the National Library of New Zealand. Next week, we are going to have a session on Māori subject headings. Then the 2 weeks after that, we're going to have some information again on this time on Library of Congress subject headings, and then something on contributing New Zealand terms to subject headings. And then finally, we are going to have a session on Kutu cataloging from the Kutu cataloging working group on creating training videos. So I hope everyone will find them useful. Most sessions will probably be around 30 to 40 minutes. Just note that one session on the New Zealand name and subjects is only going to be 20 minutes, and then we'll allow 10 minutes or a bit more depending on what questions people have afterwards. Okay, so let's move on to the AGM. So the committee have all agreed to stay on for another year. I'd like to thank Sue, Anoushka and Tamsin for all the hard work they've done this year in keeping the CatSIG committee going. But we're always keen for new members, so if anyone's interested in joining the committee, please let me know after the event. Okay, so this year we only held, well, last year I should say, we only had one event, which was our successful CatSIG talks, which we held in October, November last year. I'd like to thank all the presenters from that session and all the future presenters in this session for taking the time to share their knowledge with the community. We really appreciate it. It's what helps make that such a successful event. So in terms of finances, there's not much to report, as because we have been running web events, we are running a neutral budget, which means we have not got any profit or loss. LIANZA has slightly changed how they're doing things in the last couple of years, and we've now got to make sure we run a neutral budget. So we've got to make sure our costs cover all our outgoings. So that makes it slightly more difficult with running events, trying to work out how much to charge and things like that. So with the lockdowns, doing the online events has worked quite well for us. So again, this year we'll probably be looking at running another neutral budget because we're going to be doing online events. What we'll be doing in the following year, we're not sure. It will all be dependent on what happens with RDA and what training we need to look at for people. So along with the CatSIG talks last year, the other things we would have been involved in is Catapult. I'd like to thank Sarah for taking over the editorialship of that and making it such a success. She's agreed to continue editing that for a bit longer. I want to remind people for Cat to be a success, we rely on members of the cataloging community to contribute. So please share cataloging profiles and any other items of interest that you think other cataloguers will be interested in. Remember, we don't just catalogue, but we do a variety of different things as part of our roles that other people will probably enjoy hearing about. If we don't get enough material, it makes it very hard for us trying to make it an issue for you to enjoy. If we keep getting limited submissions, we're going to have to look at, again, reducing the number of issues a year. We prefer not to do this, so I ask you to please contribute some articles. People really enjoy reading and hearing about what other people are doing. So the only other thing I've got to mention is the Scribe NZ. As I mentioned at the last AGM, this has now been moved to hosting on the LIANZA website. It brings the organisations closer together, and it means we don't have to worry about trying to run events to cover the cost of all the administration around that. While it worked really on our previous site, it makes with us handing everything over to LIANZA, it makes it a lot less work for us, which is what the aim of LIANZA is, to try and limit the amount of admin work we need to do so we can then make sure we can get good events on for people. So I'd like to say thank you everyone for being part of the CatSIG community and attending these events. So that's pretty much all I've got. Does anyone have any questions or anything? If not, I'll pass over to Anoushka to start her part of the presentation. So Anoushka, you should be able to share your screen.
Yep, let's do that now so everyone can see my slides.
Yep.
Great. And obviously you can hear me, which is always good. Wow, who thought we'd still be working from home in 2021? I sure didn't. Okay, so I'll just give myself a minute to figure out where I am and we'll start going. Right. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you virtually again. I'm going to give you a brief update on CatSIG's contribution to the development of RDA via ORDAC, the Oceania RDA Committee. So this is going to cover the same ground I covered at last year's event, but I'm going to go a bit faster and I'm going to concentrate today on what's happened over the last year, what's changed and what's coming up. Right, so just reminding you, the RDA Steering Committee, as we all know, is the committee responsible for maintaining and developing RDA, resource description and access. So also, just as a quick reminder, there are 6 regions, each of which are to provide a regional representative to the RSC in order to give opportunities for the wider community engagement with RDA. So there are still only three regions that have convened formal bodies. So it's still Europe, North America, and us. So we currently only still have members from Australia and New Zealand, even though Oceania covers Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. We have begun reaching out to contacts in the Pacific. I would like to make a plea again. If anybody knows of anyone that we should be talking to or reaching out to in the Pacific Islands, we would really appreciate an introduction or some contact details, because we really would like to expand the representation wider than just Australia and New Zealand. So, as a quick reminder too, this is what the ORDAC does. To do these things, we primarily select the Oceania representative to the RDA Steering Committee and ensure that they are fully prepared and supported to present the viewpoint of Oceania descriptive folk at these RSC meetings. We also ensure that the news from the RSC and other information and announcements are making it to the Australian and New Zealand cataloguing community. So making sure that things are posted on the lists and also through the regular update that we do in the Catapult newsletter. So we are planning more outreach activities once we're through this current period of disruption. We had big plans for this year. We were focused on the planned RSC in-person meeting that was going to be held at the National Library of New Zealand in Wellington, and we were excited for that, but unfortunately that's not happening. And because of ongoing disruption and delays, it's probably likely that next year, 2022, is going to be our big RDA outreach and event kind of focus year. So your CatSIG representatives continue to be Chris, Todd, and myself. There are 2 Australian, like our Australian counterparts from ACORD, Eb Cardis and Melissa Parent, who is the current Oceania RSC representative. We still have Jenny Stevens as the National Library of Australia representative, and this year we were pleased to welcome Charlotte Christensen as the National Library of New Zealand representative. Charlotte has stepped right into being the Oceania RSC representative backup, and with the intention that she will step into the representative role when Melissa's term ends. We're grateful for that. And then finally, we still have Kim Guchelag as the RDA board representative for Oceania. She sits as an ex officio member on ORDAC. Right, so what have ORDAC done this year? We have continued to support Melissa at the RSC meetings. There were 3 asynchronous meetings so far this year in January, April and July. Mostly our support is reading and commenting on the papers to be discussed at these meetings so that Melissa is prepared to contribute to the discussions and raise any issues which our cataloguing community might be wanting to raise. So what's coming up? The next RSC meeting, as I mentioned, again, like last year, the in-person meeting has been cancelled. So the October meeting again will be a virtual meeting held over 2 weeks and be a mix of live and asynchronous sessions. Like last year, there will be a public session which people can attend. However, this year it's not at such a friendly time for our part of the world. It's going to be Tuesday the 19th of October at 3 a.m. in the morning, New Zealand time. If you do feel like you want to attend that meeting as an observer, you have to get in contact with the RSC secretary and register. So the primary agenda item for this public session, for the public sessions at this RSC meeting, is a discussion of the proposal to implement a collections model in RDA, which is a proposal to address the concept of collections and collection level description in RDA. There's 4 papers they'll be discussing, and these papers are available on the RSC website now. And when the full agenda is posted, I will forward them out to the CatSIG list again. We do welcome comments and feedback from the cataloguing community on these public agenda items. So if you'd like to send them to ORDAC to incorporate in our regional response to the papers, you can either send them to the email address for the ORDAC secretary, which is on the RSC website, or you can send them directly to me. And again, I'll include those details when I post the agenda to the list shortly. So what else is coming up? Implementation, hopefully. The beta toolkit became the official toolkit at the end of 2020. And we are looking forward to implementing the new RDA toolkit, but this is not likely to happen for anyone, I would think, until well into 2022 now. But this does mean for us, for CatSIG, that 2022 is going to be our big year in terms of RDA training and events, and there are going to be hopefully lots of opportunities for discussion and more webinars, I hope. So just a brief plea, we are going to be reaching out shortly to CatSIG to find out more about the cataloguing community here in New Zealand, and particularly what the needs of the cataloguing community in New Zealand are in regards to the new RDA. So when you see the survey, please respond and let us know what you need. And that's how we'll ensure that we've got the right mix of things and making the right opportunities. Right, so to find out more about ORDAC, you can go to our homepage on the RSC website, which has contact details, as I said, for the secretary, and details about the members. And that's all I have. Please, you can email Chris and I if you've got questions specifically, and if you've got questions now, I'm happy to ask. I'm happy to answer if you're happy to ask. I'm not hearing any questions and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'll just leave my email address up there for a bit longer in case you want to just note it down, because I'm really happy to answer questions about ORDAC later. Okay, right. So I'm going to take off my CatSIG committee hat now, and I'm going to get my National Library of New Zealand hat. And since we're here, I'm just going to give you a quick update on what National Library has been up to over the last year. It's just going to be a short presentation, and it is going to cover most of the same ground as last year's update from the National Library, and it's going to be all about our RDA planning for our implementation, because that's what's been consuming us for the last year. So first I'll share the timeline I posted last year, just for laughs. I'm not the only one who thought we'd be past all the COVID-related disruption by now. So we've just, that's not happening. So we have a new draft timeline. The December 2020 date is when the beta toolkit, of course, switched to being the live toolkit. The original or classic toolkit, as some are calling it, is still available, of course, and we are still using it to create our cataloguing at the moment. Sorry, and we'll do so until we are fully ready to move to the new RDA toolkit. So our new date, our next date that we're working towards is December 2021. This is when we are now hoping to have our policy statements in the toolkit itself. So we've been working hard over the last year writing them, and we are hoping in the next few months to work with ALA Publishing to do the transfer of our policy statements into the toolkit site itself. And then mid-2022, after our policy statements in the toolkit, we'll set a date for implementation that gives us time to train, and this could be between three to 4 months of training. So we're optimistically hoping that mid-2022 will be when we can move to the new toolkit. Right, so before we implement, we need the policy statements. That's number one. The policy statements are what say whether National Library applies or does not apply any of the options on an element page. Then we're going to need our supporting documentation lined up. The supporting documentation will explain in detail how we, the National Library, record the data using within our specific context, which at the moment is MARC, encoding in MARC using the ALMA Library Services platform. And then after the documentation, the application profile, which is like an overview of what to expect in somebody else's metadata. So what elements we always use, what elements we will never use. If you want to look at a real life metadata application profile, you can now. There's the BibCo standard record RDA metadata application profile, which has been what the PCC has been using for a number of years. Sorry, I've just lost my place. Right, so our focus right now is creating the policy statements, because that's the biggest piece of work. Right, so just a reminder of what the policy statements look like in the new RDA toolkit. These are British Library policy statements. Ours will be here in the same way, just as another option. So at the top of each element page, you can select whose policy statements you want to see. So we've been working steadily through all our current RDA policy and mapping it to the new options in the new toolkit. And we've also been working on making decisions for all the options for all the new elements that there are. And then also working on policy statements for all options in the guidance chapters. Don't try and read this. I'm just putting this up so that you can see what the work looks like in practice. It's a huge spreadsheet. There are approximately 3,000 elements we could choose from to describe one of the 13 entities, and each of these elements have multiple options, and each of those options need a policy statement. We have also discovered that we will sometimes need to make a policy statement at a higher level heading on an element page, so at a pre-recording heading on an element page or at a recording heading. And we also have found places in the guidance pages where there aren't options, but we still want to record a policy statement against a paragraph. So we have a sheet for each entity, and on each sheet, all the elements related to each entity. And then each line on that sheet is an option for an element, each with its unique URL. So the unique URL, luckily, contains an identifier which will allow us to map from our spreadsheet to the content management system that the RDA Toolkit uses. So we won't have to cut and paste all our policy statements into the toolkit. There is a process whereby we will be able to semi-automatically load all our policy statements once we've completed them. So even though there are over 3,000 elements, about a third of them are actually what we're thinking of as boilerplate or pattern elements. And once we've made a policy decision at one of those, we can just replicate it for the others and knock off a whole bunch of things at the same time. So even though it seems like a lot, and it is a lot, it's not quite as overwhelming as it first seems. Right, so how far we've got. So this is a visual representation of our progress, which is reassuring to see that we actually have made some progress. So you can see the blue is the total policy decisions that we have made. That's each line on the spreadsheet. The orange is total decisions remaining to be made, and the grey is just the total so that we can see really clearly where we are. We have calculated that we have a total of 7,093 decisions to be made. We have made 2,847 so far, which is about 40% of the way through. Now that sounds low, but we still have a lot of those pattern elements sitting in that 60% of decisions remaining. So once we have finished the hard work, we think that, or we expect that a lot of what is remaining will be very fast and just, rote ticking things off. So the biggest chunk of work has obviously been the manifestation elements, because that manifestation entity has the most elements, and it's where most of our policy sits now, naturally, because the manifestation is the physical thing in our hands that we describe. So we've made 2,052 decisions, and we only have 55 left to go, and then that will be all the decisions for the manifestation elements done. When I say we, I want to say that this is a team of 10 cataloguers at the National Library, each committing 6 to 8 hours a week to review the element pages, our current policy, draft a policy statements, and then get together to discuss and review these so that we can sign them off as a group. And that has been going on now for about a year. It's about a year since we really started working on this. Right, so after our policy statements are done, we're going to be reviewing and updating our supporting documentation, which will live here in the toolkit. We don't know exactly what those documents are going to look like, but expect that they'll be fairly similar to our current documentation. We're parking the bulk of this work until we have done the policy statements, obviously. But as we've gone through our policy statements, we have begun to create a master guidance document, which does capture all those details about how we will implement a policy statement in our specific environment. So the policy statement might say apply, but our guidance document will then have detailed examples of how we want cataloguers to record that data in the MARC record. So, and then we're also parking the application profile until we've completed the policy statement work. Although we are starting to see the framework of an application profile emerging naturally from the data that we're recording in our policy statements spreadsheet anyway. So we're starting to see elements that we've definitely decided we're never going to use, or at the moment we aren't going to use, and then the elements we are going to use. So I'm really hoping that it's going to be quite a straightforward process at the end of the policy statement work to bring together an application profile. Right, so further resources. I've always liked to plug the RDA Toolkit YouTube channel because it's free and they're always popping up more presentations, and yeah, there are also some new textbooks being published this year. If you've got the money, the RDA Lab series, which ran last year and this year, will maybe run again next year, so keep an eye out for that. Right, so then I will finish. I'll feel free to email me either at my personal email or using the nzmb@dia.gov.nz email. That's the National Bibliography mailbox, which is monitored by the cataloguing teams, and is a great place for any questions anybody might have relating to our cataloguing practice or mistakes we've made in our records. I always like to get those so we can fix them. Yes, so I will stop there. If anybody has any questions, either you can just speak up or pop it in the chat, or if you'd like to email me afterwards, you could do that too. So I'm not seeing any questions pop up in the chat. And nobody said anything. So I might, oh, there's something in the chat now. So Anne asks, are we looking for input from libraries? Is that input into our policy statements? Yeah, not at this stage, no. Once they're up on the toolkit, I think it'll be a lot easier to see. But right now, I think right now what we're concentrating on is just transferring our existing policy into the new format and then making decisions for the new elements and options that are consistent with our current practice. So in principle, nothing should change right away. The way we do things now should be the same, mostly. So I guess I should say we aren't directly looking for input from libraries right now, but once the policy statements are up on the toolkit, we probably will. And Amanda's just shared in the chat that it is a staggering amount of work, and yes, it is, but also it's been really valuable work. We're not the only institution, I think, that sets policy or practice and then doesn't really look at it for a long time. And this whole process has been slower than it might otherwise have been, because we are also taking the time to really interrogate what it is we actually do, and those discrepancies that we find between what we say we do and what we've said in our policy we do. There's been a bit of that, and a lot of this is our policy, but we've never actually written it down. There's a bit of that too. And then making sure everything's consistent and clear. And then I should probably also say, we will share what we can. I mean, our policy statements and our documentation will be in the toolkit, and then supporting documentation will be sharing as well.
Okay, it looks like no one else has got anything to say. Well, thank you very much, Anoushka. That was a very helpful presentation, letting us know where the National Library is up to. So, unless anyone else has any other general questions or anything, I think that's pretty much the end of this session. I just want to remind you that next week we've got the Māori subject headings with Rowan, so I encourage you to come along and hear more about Māori subject headings and find out what they're up to with all of that. I think that's going to be a very interesting session. It's been a while since CatSIG's been able to do anything with Māori subject headings. I think the last time was a presentation by Charlotte in 2019. So yeah, it'd be good to have another update on what's going on with that. So please feel free to unmute yourself or put anything in the chat if you've got anything you want to ask or say. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, just got a lot of things coming through. That's very nice.